Hello everybody. Welcome. Profoundly grateful for this time to learn and explore, remember, and unforget some of the most astonishing aspects of our situation as beings, organisms, earth organisms, animals, and humans. If you pay careful attention to that list, it should be obvious that the degree to which we are beings and organisms and animals vastly exceeds our humanity. The contexts in which our humanity arises are profoundly, shockingly different from what we imagine, because we inherit the qualities and natures, origins, and motivations of each of the registers of our nature. And the ones beyond the human are most of what there is. Yet we will suppose we are human beings. Well, while not untrue, that's the least of what's going on as us and our natures, our relationships, our minds, our souls. You are so much more than human, but to limit yourself in that way would dispose of the lion's share of your actual faculties and natures, abilities, potentials, and intelligences. I'm dedicating today's walk and talk to my dear friend, longtime confidant, Sarah West, a brilliant anthropologist, wilderness guide, therapist, artist, photographer, mother. Some of the things I will discuss today arose in conversation with Sarah, and particularly around our discussions of her intimate relationships with Black Widow cohorts that live in caves in Utah.
Yes, okay, well then nerd to your nerd.
Humans making nonsense speech to each other, probably more provocative and profound than when they speak coherently. In terms of the content, the communicable content difference between coherent speech and nonsense language. Partly perhaps due to the upregulation of right hemispheric assets required by anomalous or unfamiliar stimuli. So, I've been thinking very deeply for the past couple of days about some insights that arose in conversation with my friend Sarah. And they're truly mind-blowing. So let's get to it. there are three words that are important here. The first is analogy. So much of our actual understanding is metaphoric and analogical. One of the most profound and obvious metaphors is the relationship of our hand to our bodies, and thus our bodies to X, where X is that which our bodies are related to in a similar fashion to how our hands are related to our bodies. Not too many of us are actually familiar with this similarity. But like your hand, you have one unifying body. First you are one, right? First you are complete. And you are complete whether or not you are missing certain features or anatomical extensions. So first you are one. Then, like your hand, you have one unifying body, that from which your extensions emerge, similar to the palm. Now on the back of your hand, the unity is most apparent. On the inside, the parts are more apparent. Your body's similar, but it's sort of spiraled around something so that not all of the divisions are, quote, on the same side. But like your hand, you have one unifying body, your torso. You have 4 working members, your arms and legs, each with 3 primary segments that end in star-like figures. And like your hand, you have one sort of thinking member, the crucial feature that empowers all the other members in a unique fashion. Your thumb, which has 2 segments, like your head. Now this analogy is casual, but it's very profound. And your hand is connected to your body by the wrist. This is sort of the up register link, right? And your body has a number of such up register links, and they don't connect to your brain primarily. They connect to your torso and your gut, and perhaps most importantly, to where you were separated, where you were divided from the unity, your umbilicus. This is a very powerful analogy or metaphor. In fact, it's more than an analogy or metaphor. It's a holophore, in that it's a figure that fundamentally relates to anything you could consider. What we refer to as the organisms, but also beings like stars, mountains, living places, rivers, lakes, deserts, the ocean, the deep secret places in the ocean, the deep secret places in the mountains, the sky, the stars. All of these are not merely expressions of, they are the inaction bodies of the nature and character and purposive spirit of origin. If we consider any organism, we will find, as if it had been encrypted there, a vast, in fact an infinite, array of metaphors, many of which are inaccessible to us due to our familiar, due to the layers of conception, language, common thought, and evaluation to which we become habituated. Many of these are blinding. They give us the convenience of knowing what to call something, i.e. that is an orchid, but they don't tell us anything important. And in order to get the encrypted content, we have to slip the bonds of language and common conception, or we have to go to the ancients and the indigenous peoples who were well aware, probably consciously and spiritually, of these matters, and encoded them not merely in their arts, but in the spirit of relation with which they met each other, the living world, and the universe. A tree is perhaps one of the most profound metaphors. Our languages are based on this structure. Our technologies, particularly information technologies, there's some tree pollen in my nose right there. Our lexicons, our minds, our dreaming, our days, our relationships. They can all be understood through the analogy of the structure and activity of a tree. I remember a long time ago in my 20s, I was hanging out with Gary P., one of my old and beloved intellectual companions, creative companions. And we were looking at some oak trees out in front of Santa Rosa Junior College in the night. And they were bare at this time, so you could see the structure stood out. Yeah. And I said to him, imagine if the tree's structure represents it reaching out for relationships with birds, the sky, the stars, the sun, the moon, people passing, babies. And so the tree detects something in some direction and branches toward it, but very, very slowly by our standards of linear time. And so that would present the tree as a memory picture of all of the relationships it reached toward and into through its structure. Our minds are like this. Our dreams are like this. Our days are like this. Each of the organisms, but even the stuff we think of as inanimate, we should have another concept which is more than merely animate or produces animacy as a side effect of what it's up to. The sun and the earth and the moon belong, time-space itself belong to this category, which we in English have no. I mean, the words we might have are things like divine or origin is the one I prefer. But all of the organisms, and even stones and crystals and so forth, and as I said, waterways, they are not mere analogies, nor are they simply exemplars, examples of relationships between the fundamental principles of origin and its character, natures, motivations, which are, in nearly every case, both transcendental and infinite. So if you look very closely with the eyes of seeing what can be decrypted and understood by the observation of living beings, oh wow. you will find a sacred library that is alive to you and is familiar not in the sense of, oh, I've seen this before. No. In the sense of belonging to your own family of origin. And the accessible intelligence you can derive from the careful, more than merely metaphoric consideration of the natures and behaviors and relationships of beings is both infinite and astonishing. It's ever more astonishing the more you pay attention to it. Unlike what happens in human knowledge traditions, where once you are familiar with something, it tends to be dismissed in future encounters. Right? Once you know what a tree is, you are likely to stop caring that there are trees. And more likely, to the degree that your left hemisphere substitutes its grasp of the name for the possibilities of intimate co-awareness, understanding, relation, transcendence, and so forth. These beings, these organisms, they are the infinite living sacred libraries, any one of which could communicate to your awareness and understanding the fundamental natures and principles of your humanity, its beyond, and its origins. But these organisms, which I'm going to focus on, they have another really strange and unexpected quality. They are infinitely true. This is not the kind of truth you get from a syllogism whose terms agree, or logic, or even mathematics. This is a kind of truth that is transcendental to all representations. The only thing that might compare to the verity, the infinite verity of an organism, is a direct experience of contact with origin itself or the divine. But even that would be subject to human interpretation. The organisms are true beyond interpretation. And they are infinitely true. The more you grasp their truth, the deeper that truth becomes. And that direction in awareness is infinite. And what I mean by infinite is not merely unbounded. I mean explosively self-exceeding. With each new encounter, the depth of this verity grows catastrophically in a way that resembles a fusion event in nuclear physics. The humans are terrified of this kind of truth, and they generally ignore it. After all, what are you to do with it? So if you're a fan of verity or virtue, you want to go directly to the organisms and inquire in the deepest and most reverential way. To knock at that door is to have open to you not merely the mysteries of the universe, but the mysterious intimacies of your relationship with all beings, all forms, with origin, with intelligence, insight, wonder, awe, play, transformation, discovery, healing. There is nothing in human representational systems that can even approach the truth of a bee, or an octopus, a tiger, a sparrow, a raccoon, a turtle, a gnat. In nature, smaller size tends to mean vastly more concentrated power. The humans tend to interpret small size as insignificance. Quite the opposite thing is at play. The smaller the size, the difference in the relationship with time. If you don't believe this, try to get rid of your cells and see how long you last. They're so tiny you can't see them. Without them, you don't exist. Of all the astonishing beings in nature, and I love and have been taught by many of them, the trees very profoundly, and praying mantises very profoundly, and the hymenoptera, the bees, ants, and wasps very profoundly. But today, I want to explore the spider and the spider's web. Now, there are many different forms of web. Probably most of the spiders you've ever seen in webs are females. The reasons for that are complicated, but the female spiders are usually vastly larger than the males. The males that do make webs are few. A lot of the males travel. Some of them are kleptoparasites, right? They steal food from other webs. Some of them study females for long portions of their lives by living at the outskirts of their web, which probably gives them a better opportunity to survive mating, because mating with an ambush predator is always a tricky operation. Not necessarily because they're inclined to eat their mates, but rather because ambush predators can be triggered. And once triggered, they effectively simply execute an algorithm with their bodies and nervous systems that involves attacking whatever triggered. This is how you catch fish with lures, you trigger them. We humans also have triggers, but they tend to have a little more leeway in terms of the necessity of enacting them. One simple example is just being startled. Most creatures have the startle response, or some version of it. The spider extends its nervous system by many orders of magnitude, usually, right? It extends its body, its mind, its senses, its history, and its future into the structure that we think of as a spider's web. Now, because we thingify things, we will tend to think the spider creates an object, the object is a web. This is not the best way to think, though it's not untrue either. The relationship between the web and the spider is profoundly intimate. It's at least as intimate as your relationship with your mind, and probably more so, because it's very difficult to physicalize the anatomy of your interior. One way of doing that is by building machines. This is a devastating and usually stupid thing to do, even though I can hear those detractors who will say, well, you're using a machine right now to make this record. Yeah, I get it, I know. I'm not saying the machines don't create affordances, opportunities for the extension of our natures and potentials and intelligences. They do. But what's the cost? If we could actually see the cost, I think none of us would sign up, or very few, and fewer over time. Now, there are different kinds of spider webs. There are kinds that are extremely symmetrical, like those of the orb weaver, and kinds that are apparently incoherent structurally, like those of a black widow, or many of the spiders that make webs whose structure looks chaotic to us, right? It seems an arbitrary collection of web strands. There's some koi carp here, basking in the sun together, having a social moment. It's quite beautiful, profound. They're relatively peaceful creatures from all I can discern from observing them. And they like to be together, and they like to bask in the sun, much like the turtles do. In fact, there's a turtle among them. Now, I want you to think very carefully about how profound the spider's web is. And what I want you to see about it is something truly strange, which is that you probably, if you're much like me, and much like most people, you believe that you are local to your body. The you and your body are not merely inseparable, they seem to be the same thing. And so you imagine that the extent of yourself is limited to the surface of your body. A natural enough intuition for a modern human, untrained in other ways of seeing. Yet fundamentally, it is not so. There are dimensions of yourself, invisible to you probably, and mostly to your thought or concern, that extend all the way back to the beginning of time, that extend into all beings, in all places, in all moments of time, including the future. They extend into other minds. Your mind has the capacity to transfer its locality into anything in that network, and any group of beings in that network. Though you do not commonly experience this, the fact that you dream is evidence of that situation. Your dreaming mind is secretly aware of this. Your waking mind is probably terrified of the momentous impact that such senses would have on its seeming sovereignty over consciousness, which is in fact a defensive error. Because its sovereignty was meant to be sacrificed to something that's liberating and infinitely profound. The spirit of insight, if you will. The spirit of origin. When the spider constructs a web, it's an astonishingly exacting process. Whether the web is geometrically symmetrical, like an orb weaver's, or apparently incoherent, like a black widow's, the same principles are at play in different ways. The spider is not thinking. It's conceivable that it's doing something that resembles the concept of calculation in humans. But the spider is not representational in the way humans are. It probably doesn't make models and maps. What it is doing is a direct expression of the truth of its nature, origin, and embodiment, its histories, its ancestors, its children, all of them are present in the construction of the web. And the web extends the spider's nervous system, effect, attention, and body over a vast space in deep relation with place, light, time, weather, the sun, the moon, shade, all of these things. In fact, when you see a spider's web, what you are seeing in miniature is a holophore. It is an infinite library of the expressions and natures of everything. But most particularly, your mind, your consciousness, how you relate with phenomena, your representational mind, your relationships. The spider sifts the web, it sifts time and space, and it transforms the nature of time and space, not merely over its extent, but in a repercussive array of waves that emanate from the web into time-space. The spider's web is a way of warping time-space, which all organisms are. Organisms are unique modes of time-space, right? Of time, form, space, relation, all these things. I was shocked when I became aware of this during my conversation with Sarah in which this arose. We were talking about the disorganized seeming features of a black widow's web. And it suddenly occurred to me that the seeming disorganization could actually be a different mode of organization, a mode of relation with time that is invisible to the eye that seeks symmetry, but would instantly appear highly coherent to a mind that seeks positional relations with opportunity and threat over time. This is what most organisms are doing. Like human technologies, they attempt to amplify what are understood as opportunistic or, quote, positive events per interval of time. The web, by extending the spider's body over space-time, increases the number of encounters with other organisms, particularly insects, that the spider consumes, transforms into life, right? By killing those insects, it makes more life. It even aids the insects it captures. Though this is more complex because that register is filtering out the insects that fail to detect the web or are, quote, accidentally captured by it. And that modifies the gene line in human clinical understanding, but there are other registers that are profoundly more important than that, and at least as real, if not more real, than mere genetic modification of the cohort over time. So predators sift their prey cohorts and mostly capture disoriented, sick, injured, or creatures with other qualities that make them that subject them to death. Now, everything dies, but not everything that dies contributes to all beings, all previous generations. and all future generations. The spider's web is a way, as are all predators, of prospering the existing cohorts by sifting them. The web creates a situation where the number of meaningful incidents over time is increased, and under certain conditions it's increased manifold. So for example, if the spider makes a web near an artificial light, that radically increases the number of events per interval where the spider is likely to acquire nourishment and preparation for the generation of its children. And this is what I mean by the understanding that the spider's web warps time. Right? It creates a seemingly local situation where the number of encounters per interval is greatly magnified. Also, the spider's sensitivity to environmental situations, particularly light and wind, both of which will increase those encounters per interval. Wind, for a spider's web, actually speeds up time. Right? If you look carefully at this, you will notice that wind speeds up time for all organisms. It changes a lot of variables that we don't usually track. Stillness is much more problematical. Spiders will tend to place their webs where there are multiple opportunity magnifiers. And for most of history, there were no artificial lights, but the relationship between the webs and light is profound, and much more subtle than it appears superficially. Before there were artificial lights, the spiders chose carefully places where wind, lighting, sunlight, moonlight, weather, and other features which we don't even have names for were involved in their selection of place and situation to erect a web, and also in their determinations about when to move one. By studying the spider's web, you can learn things about the nature of your soul, the features of your existence that are hidden from you. And these things are astonishing and infinite. There will be no end of them. The more attention you pay, the more intimate you are with the spider, the web, and the situation. The more staggering the insights that will arise in your awareness as you continue to delve into these matters. The disorganized webs are a different way of relating with time. And rather than sifting the atmosphere, right, the horizontal, which is what the spiraling orb-like webs tend to be for, the disorganized webs have more to do with things falling into them, the vertical, from above. And so if you're crafting a web based on filtering the horizontal, both forms work, but they work very differently. In the structure of both webs are hidden, astonishing secrets and mysteries that are alive. They are not riddles to be answered, they are riddles to be married and pursued with adoration and wonder and awe over a lifetime or more. The other day, there's a spider in my life right now. It's very important to me. specific one. And this is not uncommon. I've had spider friends throughout most of my life. Though I was not aware of this web thing, and it resembles something I was shown by what I usually refer to as the angel or toy maker, which was that one's extent in space-time is not local to one's body. In fact, the degree of one's being that is local to one's body is minimal, in the sense that it's as if the body is a concretion of vast dimensions of relation and presence in time, space, and relation that is invisible to us in the ways that we think and conceive of ourselves. So imagine that your nature, your soul, is to you as the spider's web is to the spider. Right? This reverses the what seems to be the case in the spider and her web, which is the spider extends herself by forming a web. This is an inversion of that. The web extends itself by forming a location, you. Right? You are an extension of all beings, all places, all principles in time-space and in what generates time-space, which is entirely transcendental to our common abilities to conceive of or speak meaningfully about. So the other night, I was looking at my spider's web and thinking, what would happen if she were gone? Well, for a time, the web might still capture organisms, but she would not transform them into life and death. She would be gone, so their death would seem to be unnecessary, and yet it still would have the function of filtering time-space and organismal nature, affecting future cohorts of insects and past cohorts of insects, because although we don't realize it, transformations in the present change the meaning of past events. This is obvious. It's relatively easy to see this. If I do something so beautiful today that my ancestors and perhaps the history and future of life on Earth stand up and, applaud and cheer, then that will recast my previous mistakes and errors in a new light. If the humans were to suddenly become amazingly intelligent and altruistic, this would transform the meaning of all of their historical misbehavior, war and greed and cruelty and so forth. So events in this moment transform the meaning of historical events and potentiate future events in a way not dissimilar to how sexual union generates children. So if the spider were to depart, the web would remain for a time. It might trap some insects. But then I started to think about the analogy between the spider's web and my representational cognition, my thinking. Also my heart, right? The web is an excellent analogy for both, but they function very differently. So my mind's web is like a web made by a fake spider. And it doesn't collect beings and by consuming them, transform them into life the way the spider does, it does something far weirder. It collects little structures that are shiny and resemble its own peculiarities, and instead of consuming them and turning them into life, it creates something that isn't even death, it's deadness. And then it treasures those captures, identifies with them, right? It thinks, oh, these captures are me, and will preserve them at any cost, including the cost of growth, development, healing, beauty, love, relationships. And in case this isn't obvious, you can see this potential in human technological developments, particularly things like the internet, where images and texts are preserved at all costs. If we were to be told, somehow, as a species, that the continuation of the use of this technology would mean our short-term obliteration, probably what would happen is simply we would double down on it. Because the aspect of our human natures that are easily captured by, the aspects that are captured by representations are fierce, and they don't care about lives. They don't care about organisms. In fact, they don't care. Their motivations are primarily the preservation of representations at all costs, and my own mind is like this. It's like a spider web with a fake spider, and that phony spider is highly motivated to collect little shiny representations of that with which it identifies and preserve them over time at all costs, at the cost of my intelligence, my emotions, my heart, my soul, my ancestors, the world, the universe, anything. That phony spider is extremely busy, and unless something wakes me up, I think that's me, and am unaware of all of this. So what I would like to happen is that the actual spider of my origins, natures, true motivations, virtues, potentials, could forge a web that could capture that spider and consume it, free the web of all the collected jetsam, reestablish a web whose natures and purposes were oriented in being and relation in a way as true as the spider's ways are. And then, perhaps, I could reintroduce the phony spider as long as its behavior and the web making was managed by the real one. This is a difficult task for most of us. Even though I am aware of these things, it's extremely challenging for me. I consciously, when I'm awake, I identify with that phony spider and its captures. It's like the treasure trove of a drunken dragon that can't tell it isn't the treasures it collects and just keeps collecting treasures at every cost until, of course, the vast store of treasure draws those interested in acquiring it. Woe be unto them. All of our technologies transform time and space. The oven speeds it up. The refrigerator slows it down. The internet transforms the meaningfulness of identity and relation into tokenized features that can be captured by governments and corporations and cohorts interested in manipulating or profiting from the ever more serious fracking of human interiority and intimacy. Also, particularly privacy, which turns out to be fundamentally important to human minds and relationships, because without the guarantee of privacy, there are all kinds of things that you not only will not say, you will not think them. So the loss of privacy deprives us of the freedom to understand our own natures and potentials by limiting what we will say or participate in under the dangers of observation. The threats. I want you to think carefully about the difference between, say, a cubic centimeter of air, right? What we usually think of as empty space, even though it's not empty. In fact, there's probably something in space, more than one thing that humans have no concept of, that space itself is an expression of. But think about imagine that we just take a cubic inch or even a cubic foot of the space in front of me as I walk through this garden. Now, if we examined everything in that space, well, it would be impossible, an infinite task to examine everything. But if we examined everything available to, say, a microscope level of magnification, mostly what we would find is some dust. And so the nature of time in that space is different from a cubic foot of the inside of a stone or the same volume of water. But what I want you to notice is if there's a complex organism in that cubic foot of space, say a sparrow or a small octopus, what you have there is a completely different situation as regards time. When Einstein asked us to merge our understandings of time and space, this wasn't an accident. There's no such thing as space without time, and there's no such thing as time without space. These are the same thing. It's still sometimes useful to differentiate them, but we failed to get the treasure from relativity because our species was really interested in building machines around it and making measurements and so forth. But organisms are a unique mode of time-space, and they create modes of time that are impossible without them. And this is what I mean when I say the spider and her web warps time in a very spiderly fashion. And that warping is not merely local to the spider and her web. It affects histories and futures. It has registers of effect that are nearly impossible for us to conceive of unless we've been taken above the register where human cognition is comfortable and tends to remain. So the spider is a warping of time, and the web extends that warp. Now the spider's a bit like a web. It's also a bit like a hand with more fingers. And the center of the web, in a spiral web, like an orb weaver's, is a representation of the feature of existence that is represented by the wrist in its relationship to the hand, and by the umbilicus in its relationship to the body, and by either the numbers 0 or 1 in mathematics, without which you kind of don't have mathematics. So the center of the web in a geometric web leads to origin. Now I'm going to make some seemingly ridiculous statements here, which is that you can use a spider's web as a portal. I've tried to demonstrate how it could be used as a portal to intelligence, but it can be used as a portal to things that humans don't commonly believe in. That center of the web in a geometric web is a doorway to the impossible. Again, every organism is like this. They are holophores. They are encrypted, well, they're not intentionally encrypted. Without our representational cognition, or if it were, how to put this, if the volume were turned down enough, right, the insights would flow in an explosive cascade into our awareness, access, and even perhaps utilization, although I'm kind of afraid of when the humans become utility-minded. The incredible truthfulness, the perfect infinite verity of any organism, I just have to highlight this one more time, exceeds the entire scope of the possibility space of the verity of statements and even mathematics. Organisms are a superposition over knowledge, and they're truthful. They never lie. They don't dissemble. There are no explanations. They are being incarnate, in form, in relation, infinitely profound, infinitely more than merely alive. A single organism is more valuable than the entire history of human cognitive, mechanical, and technological endeavors. In fact, if you were to point your finger at the sky and just follow that line for 100 light years, your chances of encountering something as complex as an octopus are probably very close to zero. So we live on a world that is more amazing than we're capable of conceiving, and yet as a species we don't care. We've been sort of captured by the motivations of the fake spider, right? The left hemispheric inclination to graspable representations and the dismissal of the value of beings. It's a very peculiar situation. Our representational aspects are profound gifts, but if they're not guided by something trustworthy, they quickly become profound threats, and not merely to us, but certainly to our hearts and our capacities for developmental efflorescence and understanding of our natures, but to life itself. There's so much more here to explore, but for the moment, I think I have mostly succeeded in transmitting some of my enthusiasm and insight about the spider and her web. A spider friend is a very good friend to have, and so are you. Thank you for joining me. I look forward to learning, unforgetting, exploring, and growing together again very soon. May your life be blessed with love and insight, wonder and play. May those you love be safe and healthy and joyful. And may your dreams be amazing, rich, deep, and memorable. Thank you for joining me. Bye-bye for now.